In February of 2014, a college student in Oklahoma named Amelia Hamrick zoomed in on the naked backside of a man crushed under a giant lute inside a 500-year-old vision of hell. She saw marks. She thought they were notes. So she played them on a piano, posted the recording online, and within days, outlets like The Guardian and NPR were calling it a secret medieval hymn, hidden for half a millennium in the most private place a painter could choose. Millions listened. Almost nobody who shared it stopped to ask one simple question. Could anyone actually prove this was ever a melody in the first place? To understand why that question matters, we have to leave the viral clip behind and return to the man who painted it, into a much stranger problem. Not what the notes sound like, but whether Bosch ever wanted them to sound at all. The painting is Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, painted somewhere between 1490 and 1510. Bosch himself was not the tortured outsider people imagine. He lived comfortably in the prosperous city of Hertogenbosch, married into wealth through his wife Aleid van de Meerven, and in 1488 he became a sworn brother of the Brotherhood of Our Lady, one of the most conservative religious guilds in the region. He was not a heretic. He was not hiding from the church. For a long time, popular writing insisted he must have belonged to some secret sect, or that he painted his monsters under the influence of ergot fungus growing on spoiled rye. The guild's own records tell a duller story. Bosch organized services, hired musicians, and sang in the choir himself. He read music fluently. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, and we will come back to it. One biographical fact has often been used to explain the fires that keep appearing in Bosch's imagination. As a child of about 13, he may have witnessed the catastrophic blaze that tore through Hertogenbosch in 1463 and destroyed more than 4,000 houses in a single night. Whether it truly marked him forever, nobody can prove. But once you know the story, the burning horizon in his hell becomes harder to look at as pure decoration. Now look at the painting itself. 3 panels, and on the surface, the reading is simple. On the left, Eden, calm and green, God presenting Eve to Adam. In the center, an explosion of pink flesh, hundreds of naked bodies tangled among oversized fruit and impossible architecture. On the right, darkness lit only by distant fires. The obvious story writes itself: paradise, temptation, punishment. A medieval sermon on a wooden panel. But look again, because Bosch buried at least 4 things in this altarpiece that the obvious reading cannot explain. Here is the first one. In the corner of Eden, half hidden inside a dark opening at the base of the pink fountain of life, an owl stares out at the viewer. In the Renaissance, an owl was not a symbol of wisdom the way we think of it now. It stood for spiritual blindness, for heresy, for a creature so unclean it was said to foul its own nest. Bosch placed it inside paradise itself, at the exact source of life. Long before anyone eats a single strawberry in the center panel, corruption is already sitting quietly inside heaven. Here is the second. Look closely at the crowd in the middle panel and count the ages. There are no children. There are no elderly people. Every single body is frozen at the peak of youth. Historians rarely dwell on this, but after you notice it, the entire garden starts to feel less alive than trapped. A garden overflowing with fertility that produces no births and no deaths is not really about pleasure at all. It is about a loop that goes nowhere. Before we go further into that loop, there is a third detail that almost nobody notices, because it is not even inside the visible painting. When this altarpiece is closed, the outer panels show something completely different, painted only in shades of gray. A transparent sphere hangs in dark water. The earth on the third day of creation, before any person exists. Tucked into the upper corner, barely larger than a thumbnail, sits a tiny figure of God the Father, holding a book. Beside him runs a line from the Psalms, a promise that whatever he commands simply comes into being. That single detail sets the terms of the whole argument before the panels even open. Whatever chaos waits on the inside, the outside insists none of it happens without permission from above. The central panel does not argue with one symbol. It argues by repetition. Every pleasure is shown at the exact moment before it spoils. The strawberry motif that gives the painting its earliest known name, listed in the 16th century Spanish royal inventory simply as the painting of the strawberry tree, drew on an old warning borrowed from classical writing about a serpent hiding in sweetgrass. A strawberry looks harmless. It ripens fast and rots faster. That was the point. Then Bosch makes the same idea heavier, literally heavier. In one corner, a man carries an enormous mussel shell on his back, and inside it, a couple lies hidden. Shells were tied for centuries to Venus and to female sexuality, and here the shell becomes a physical weight, something dragged around rather than enjoyed. And in hell, pleasure is no longer even disguised as pleasure. It becomes paperwork. A pig wearing the veil of a nun leans over a terrified man and pushes a document toward him, sealed in wax. This is not subtle once you know the context. It reads as a direct swipe at the sale of indulgences, at clergy who profited from the fear of ordinary people paying their way out of punishment they had been taught to dread. Now move deeper into the same dark panel, past the instruments, past the crushed bodies, until one face suddenly stops behaving like part of the crowd. A hollow-bodied creature with legs shaped like boats and a colossal pale face turns to look directly out at the viewer, somewhere between weary and amused. Some scholars have proposed that this face may be Bosch himself, not a signature in the ordinary sense, but a private act of self-placement inside his own damnation. It is, honestly, one of the strangest jokes in the history of religious art, an artist attending his own hell as a spectator. I think Bosch placed that owl exactly where he did on purpose, at the one spot in paradise nobody expects corruption to already exist. That is not something any inventory or church record tells you. It is just what the composition seems to be doing. Once you notice, paradise was never actually clean. Long thought to be a straightforward morality lesson, the center panel has actually split historians into open disagreement for decades. Some, aligned with the Prado's own official position, read it as a warning against lust, a false paradise that leads directly and logically into the punishment on the right. Others point out something strange. If Bosch wanted to condemn this behavior, why did he paint it so softly, so brightly, with none of the violence that fills his other hell scenes? There is no fighting here, no cruelty, just a strange, sleepwalking calm on every face. That single observation is enough to make the tidy moral reading wobble. Now we reach the Hell panel, and this is where the real detective work happens. Because underneath the paint, there is a second version of this scene that Bosch quietly erased. Infrared scanning by the Bosch Research and Conservation Project found that the artist originally sketched hollow, rotting giant fruit across the Hell panel, echoing the fruit from the garden. At some point during the painting process, he changed his mind, painted over the fruit, and replaced it with something else entirely. Musical instruments, a colossal lute, a harp, a hurdy-gurdy, a pink bagpipe large enough to walk under. On the surface, these look decorative, almost absurd. But in Bosch's moral world, these are not neutral instruments. They belong to the world of taverns, minstrels, seduction, and secular pleasure, exactly the kind of sound that hell can turn into punishment. Bosch turns that association into punishment through poetic reversal. Bodies are pinned to harp strings. A man is crucified across the neck of a lute, while a serpent coils around him. The instruments that once accompanied pleasure now hold the guilty in place forever. And it is here, crushed beneath that giant lute, that we find the detail Amelia Hamrick zoomed in on in 2014. Notation, drawn directly onto a man's bare skin. Long before her video went viral, people assumed this was simply a decorative flourish. It was not the first time someone tried to perform it either. In 1978, a Spanish early music ensemble called Atrium Musicae, led by Gregorio Paniagua, had already recorded an interpretation of this exact passage on an album titled Codex Gluteo. A Swedish group did their own version in 2003. So the internet did not discover a secret. It rediscovered an old curiosity and dressed it up as a 500-year-old mystery solved by one student. But here is the nail that actually breaks the whole viral story apart. A musicologist named Ian Pittaway examined the marks with real technical rigor and demonstrated something the viral clip never mentioned. What Bosch drew is what specialists call stroke notation, a shorthand missing the one thing any melody actually requires to be read back reliably: a clef, and a fixed position for that clef on the staff. Without those two things, there is no way to know whether a mark sits on a high note or a low one. Hamrick's tune only exists because she arbitrarily assumed a C clef sat on the second line. Choose a different starting point, and you get an entirely different song, or no reconstructible song at all. Here is the part that, on my own reading of everything Bosch did with music elsewhere in this same painting, I think we have been getting backwards for a decade. We assumed the hidden notes were a message, a wink from the artist, something he wanted us to eventually crack, the way you'd crack a code. But Bosch was not an outsider guessing at musical symbols. He lived inside a world of liturgy, choirs, hired musicians, and written notation. So the unreadability does not feel accidental. It feels deliberate. In his hell, music has been stripped of the one thing that makes it music at all: meaning. What looks like a secret hymn is actually the sound of art itself being punished, turned into noise nobody can ever reliably perform for eternity. That is the real trophy hiding inside this painting, not a melody, the proof that a melody was never possible in the first place. Officially, historians at the Prado still favor the straightforward moral reading of the whole triptych, punishment following naturally from sin. But that reading has never fully closed the case, because it cannot explain why paradise in Eden already hides an owl at its source of life, or why the center panel refuses to show a single moment of guilt, shame, or violence among hundreds of bodies. One historian in the 1950s even proposed, controversially, that Bosch secretly belonged to a free love sect and painted the center panel as their private manifesto. Most scholars today dismiss that theory outright, but nobody has ever produced the one document that would settle any of this permanently, because Bosch never wrote a word explaining his own painting. And the original title he gave it, if he gave it one at all, has been lost completely. We will never know exactly what conversations happened in front of this altarpiece in the Nassau Palace in Brussels, where it hung not in a church, but in a private noble residence built for entertaining guests with wine and unusual art. That changes the room around the painting. In a church, this would have been almost impossible to control as doctrine. In a noble residence, it could operate differently, as a dangerous conversation piece, a private mirror for people powerful enough to enjoy being morally disturbed. Which brings us to the deepest, quietest observation in the whole painting. There is no judge anywhere in this hell. No Christ enthroned weighing souls, the way every other apocalypse painted by Bosch's contemporaries insisted on showing. People simply drift from temptation into torment, with no trial, no verdict, no divine hand forcing the transition. Sin here is not judged from outside. It behaves like an illness that carries its own punishment built directly into it. Notice how that absence echoes the other absence we already found in the garden. No children, no elders, and now, no judge. A world with no beginning and no verdict is a world with no consequence built into its own timeline, which may be the quietest, cruelest joke Bosch ever painted. One man engaged with all of this more seriously than almost anyone else on record. King Philip II of Spain, the monarch who later owned the triptych and sent it to the monastery of El Escorial, did not treat Bosch as a joke or a curiosity. In the early 1600s, a monk close to the royal court, Fray José de Sigüenza, defended Bosch precisely because he saw in him not fantasy for the sake of fantasy, but a painter willing to show a person exactly as they are underneath, rather than how they wish to appear. A king who commanded armies across 2 continents kept a 500-year-old painting of hell inside his own monastery walls, close enough to sit with whenever his own conscience needed the company. That, on its own, might be one of the strangest documented relationships between a ruler and a painting in this entire story. And this is where the painting stops being an image on a screen. In the Prado, it is almost architectural. The triptych spans nearly 4 meters wide in its commonly cited open format, oak panel covered edge to edge in figures smaller than a fingernail. Tree ring analysis dates the wood itself to somewhere between 1460 and 1466, decades before Bosch ever touched it with paint. Restorers in Madrid spent 3 full years, from 1997 to 2000, removing centuries of yellowed varnish, and what came out from underneath were colors closer to fluorescent pink and acid green than the murky brown most people still picture when they imagine medieval art. None of that shows up in a textbook photograph. All of it changes how the painting actually feels standing in front of it. So maybe that is the real question this 500-year-old altarpiece leaves us holding. If a man, devout enough to sing in his church choir every week, chose instead to draw a song that could never be reliably played, then what was he really telling us about pleasure, about music, about the noise we mistake for meaning? If the melody was fake from the beginning, then what exactly were millions of us humming along to? Bosch's secret, or our own need to believe every mark is a message?